The interior of the Crusader tank was an oven. Outside, the Libyan sun beat down on the hull until the steel was hot enough to blister skin. Inside, Sergeant Miller and his crew were breathing a thick cocktail of diesel fumes, cordite, and fine, powdery sand that seemed to bypass their goggles and grit between their teeth. "Driver, steady on the ridge," Miller shouted over the deafening roar of the engine. "If we crest too fast, we'll be a silhouette against the sky, and those 88s will find us before we see them." The tank groaned as it climbed the soft side of a dune. To Miller, the desert felt like a living thing, a golden trap that could hide an entire panzer division in a single shimmering heat haze. They were part of a reconnaissance in force, a fancy way of saying they were the bait meant to draw out the enemy's hidden guns. "Target, 10 o'clock. The gunner, a quiet lad named Danny, yelled. Miller swung his binoculars. Through the dancing heat waves, he saw at the boxy, gray shape of a German Panzer III, half buried in a sand berm, 2,000 yards away. It looked like a toy in the distance, but the puff of white smoke from its barrel was very real. Clang. The world inside the tank turned into a bell. The enemy shell had skimmed off the turret, leaving a searing white gouge in the armor and sending a shower of red-hot rivets flying across the cabin. "Danny, fire!" Miller bellowed. The tank rocked back as their own 2-pounder gun barked. The smell of spent brass filled the cramped space. Through the smoke, Miller watched their shell strike the sand just short of the German tank, sending up a fountain of grit. "Reload, left 2 degrees. Suddenly, the engine bay let out a high-pitched scream. "Sarge, the filters are choked," the driver cried. "She's overheating. We're losing power." The tank slowed to a crawl, its tracks churning uselessly in the deep sand. They were sitting ducks in the middle of a flat, featureless plain. Miller looked out the periscope and saw a second German tank emerging from the haze, then a third. "Everyone out?" Danny asked, his voice trembling. "No," Miller said, his jaw set. "If we bail now, they'll machine gun us before we hit the sand. We fix the air intake, or we die in this tin box. Danny, keep the turret moving. Make them think we're still in the fight. Arthur, get the fire extinguisher and follow me." Miller popped the hatch. The heat from the sun hit him like a physical blow, even worse than the engine's fire. Bullets began to kick up dust around the tank, sounding like hail on a tin roof. He scrambled onto the rear deck, his boots sliding on the hot metal. The air filters were caked in a thick crust of desert lime. With the frantic energy of a man facing his end, Miller hammered at the casing with a heavy wrench, clearing the blockage while Arthur sprayed the cooling vents. A shell whistled so close overhead that the vacuum of its passage nearly knocked Miller off the tank. "Try it now." Miller screamed. Below him, the engine coughed, spat a cloud of black soot, and then roared back to life with a deep, healthy thrum. Miller dived back into the hatch just as a high-explosive round detonated on the sand beside them, peppering the hull with shrapnel. "Go! Go! Go!" The tank lurched forward, kicking up a massive dust devil behind it. Miller used the cloud of sand as a screen, zigzagging across the dunes. Danny fired one last shot, a lucky strike that hit the German's track, leaving the enemy spinning in circles. By the time they reached the safety of the British lines, the sun was beginning to set, turning the desert into a sea of deep purple and cooling blue. Miller climbed out and leaned against the tank's hull. It was still warm, but the deadly heat of the day was gone. He looked at his crew, 3 men covered in grease, sweat, and enough sand to fill a bucket. They didn't look like heroes. They looked like coal miners who had survived a collapse. But as they shared a single canteen of warm, metallic-tasting water, Miller looked at the scorched, battered tank they called the Lady Luck. In the desert, the wind eventually erases every footprint and every grave. But for one more night, the dust had stayed on their side.